Today's Get Growing presentation, the Backyard Orchard. This is a presentation I've delivered to in person previously and thought it was a very good one to add to our Get Growing webinar series. My name is Grant McCarty. I'm with University of Illinois Extension as a local foods and small farms extension educator, and I'll share a little bit more about myself as we get going along today. So this is my photo, which you see here, and I covered Daviess-Stephenson-Winnebago counties. These are in northern Illinois, and I know that some of you all are joining us from other parts of Illinois. These three counties touch the Wisconsin state line. And primarily the audience I work with are homeowners, backyard growers, as well as commercial fruit and vegetable growers that sell at farmers markets, pick your own operations, or orchards in our area. I tend to also work in soil management. So you may have joined me last week for the webinar on soil management, heard a lot about soil during that time. I also work in insect and disease management for fruits and vegetable production. Since 2017, I've been working in fruit tree pruning classes, in-person trainings, and providing this for homeowners as well as backyard growers and community gardens. This is a growing area that we find a need for in our extension office, and that's why I provide that service. I want to be upfront and share with you that I am in planting zone 5B. If you're joining us from other parts of the state, you're probably in a very different planting zone. Much of the information I share with you today is replicable, so there should not be any issues when it comes to some of the practices and cultivars that I share with you. However, I just want to be clear on that because of our planting zone, we tend to be about the last spring, around mid-May. Last spring frost is around mid-May every year. This may mean that when it comes to, say, practices as far as pruning, practices as far as spraying, your fruit trees may be at different growth stages than what we really see in northern Illinois. Just as a caution there. So today's plan is going to get started, thinking about adding fruit trees to the backyard. What might your overall orchard be? Some of these logistical things that you need to consider when you add fruit trees, as well as how to think about your established orchard. We'll get into the different types of fruit trees that are available to you and what you might think about and add to the backyard setting. I'll share with you planting day. What does planting day look like? What are some tasks and practices that you need to do on that planting day? I have recently just planted 2 peach trees as of this Sunday, and I will share with you photos of what that process looked like and some of the things that I did beforehand when it came to planting these new fruit trees. I will get into first day and kind of the first year of pruning, some of the basics of it. Because of the time of year that I am presenting this, know that we are out of the woods when it comes to pruning. We are very much past that dormancy place where you could be pruning. So as much as I will share the pruning process, some of the best practices with it, know that these are going to be things that you will do this upcoming winter. We're too warm at this stage, and we've also moved past that dormancy period. Because I work a lot in insects and disease management, you're going to hear a lot about insects and disease management and pest management. I've also included animals and mammal control because this is a common question that I get when I present this class, and I've tried to include that subsequent information. I'll also get into some seasonal management issues. What are some things that you need to consider when it comes to kind of that backyard orchard approach? As we go along today, you'll see photos from my backyard and some of my fruit trees. I also am sharing some of the photos of a family orchard back in Tennessee with you. Some of my old, ugly and neglected fruit trees that need some assistance. So yet again, thinking about what are some of the challenges when it comes to a backyard orchard, especially in northern Illinois, but recognizing too that these can be some challenges we run into in central and southern Illinois too. In Northern Illinois, we're primarily in this planting zone 5, and occasionally we are right on that zone 5. As you look through catalogs and websites to purchase fruit trees, you will see some cultivars and types of trees that will say that this is good for zone 5 to zone 7. And you need to be a little cautious with those trees that are right on the edge. It would be different if that tree was good for zone 3 to zone 7. But because a tree might be stating it's zone 5 to 7, that's the best growth for it, you may run into some issues on a seasonal basis. So we have to take that in mind, that in choosing certain fruit types, we may be a little cautious with this. What this also means is that most of the time we do not see peach orchards in Northern Illinois because our winters are just too rough for them. You see more commonly peach orchards in Central and Southern Illinois that do well and thrive in that area. So that's something we take into mind, is that I'd still encourage you to maybe put out some peach trees or stone fruit in the backyard, but recognize that we are right on that zone of zone 5. We also see the impact of hard winters still linger. We're still looking at snow potentially coming in this upcoming week. In parts of our area, we have a bit more valleys and hillsides, and we see pockets of these microclimates where they may be a little bit cooler than we expect them to be. And because of that, we have limited cultivar and research. You may also find that some trees may need more than one variety. They may need winter protection, and they may need deer wildlife protection from any damage from those. This is pretty true for Central and Southern Illinois when it comes to what your trees may need as well. So decided on fruit trees. Apples and pears grow well in Illinois. Those two groups, and we tend to group them together, really do well most seasons. We don't see too many issues when it comes to managing them, and you will find great success in growing the apples and pears. There's many different cultivars with different rootstocks available on the market, and as much as we can suggest and recommend different cultivars, every year there seems to be new ones that are now available for purchase. I find that there's very few modifications to the soil needed for apple and pears. Because of the richness of our soil type, we tend to not see as many issues when it comes to actually modifying that soil. They tend to be pretty well. It's important to recognize that we will need more than one cultivar for pollination in apples and pears. I'll discuss this more as we go along today, but know that when it comes to planting these, you need more than one of these types in order to have proper pollination and to get that fruit. Peaches, plums, cherries, apricots are all within the stone fruit category. And these are ones that, yes, you could still plant in the backyard and they may grow well for you, but they depend highly on the season and the winter. The reason being that the stone fruit will produce its buds the previous summer. And those buds, the actual fruit, has to go through an entire winter to then produce in that spring. Meaning that the buds that were produced in the summer of 2019 have had to go through the winter of 2020 to then produce fruit in the summer of 2020. So the survival rate is very hard with stone fruit because they have to go through that winter. You may find that this group will benefit from having some kind of wind protection, such as a buffer. I have anecdotally noticed that with some of the fruit trees that we see in Northern Illinois. And you may also find that they may benefit with more than one variety. While it is not necessary, their yields may be far greater by having an additional one there. So those are kind of the two categories when we think about the backyard orchard in Illinois: the apples and the pears, the peaches, plums, cherries, and the apricots. You have been, I sent you an email with these slides, so you will have these cultivars listed. And these are some cultivars that have been recommended in Northern Illinois, but they also have applicability in Central as well as Southern Illinois. I would imagine that Southern Illinois would have many more cultivars available based on your planting zone, though. So look at these that have been recommended as well as look at other options too. For peaches, this is Contender, it's Reliance, and it's Madison. The two peach trees that I planted this Sunday were Contender and Reliance, and I'll show you photos of what those look like. Plums includes Mountain Royal, Black Ice, Pipestone. These are three that are commonly recommended for that northern Midwestern orchard. Black Ice is a very common one that a lot of folks have shared with me they've had very good success with. For cherries, which includes both tart and sweet, you'll find lots of different cultivars out there. The Nanking is a bush cherry, and you see a photo of it here in this image. I've heard very good things about it. It's bush quality, its nice flowering quality is something that's very attractive into the garden. Even though it has that bush quality, know that it can be a very big type of bush. We're not talking about, say, a 2 or 3 foot tall cherry bush. We're talking about something that's much bigger with that. Meteor, Mount Morency, and North Star have also been recommended. For apricots, this includes Sun Gold, Moon Gold, and Scout. I've not had as many folks ask about apricots previously. It is one that would grow in our area, so you just kind of want to do some additional research on it. And I would consider it in that kind of same broad category of stone fruit. There's other fruit trees that are out there that don't always get the attention that they do compared to some of the other ones. Asian pears are one that have very good yields to them in our area. We see them commonly being sold and commonly grown and perform pretty well. You may need some winter protection on them, but otherwise they tend to perform pretty well. This includes Chojuro, New Century, and Hoisey. And you may need more than one, but this could be a Bartlett pear if you have established in your area. You see a photo of the Asian pear in the background, that gold copper looking pear shape to it. I have grown fig and citrus in containers indoors. While these are not being grown in a backyard setting, I still consider them part of my backyard orchard. I've had Meyer lemon for the last couple of years that has performed pretty well for me when it comes to its actual yields. I have grown fig, the Chicago Hardy, in a container in my living room. And this is a photo of my Chicago Hardy from yesterday. It produces very small figs. While it's not going to be able to feed a lot, I certainly could use it in a recipe that I might be choosing. Both fig and citrus could be grown indoors during the winter time and the fall, and then brought outdoors during the summer and get that nice summer weather and warmth that they need. Pawpaw is a type that we are seeing a lot of questions about, and folks are asking more about this tree. Two recommended are Pennsylvania Golden as well as Prolific. In most cases, you need 2 trees to grow pawpaws. There is a lot of research coming out of Kentucky State University on pawpaw with growing it, how it performs, and what are some just general kind of basics of growing that tree. You see a photo of the pawpaw there in the bottom corner. It has a very custard-like flavor to it. Personally, it's not my favorite, but I know a lot of folks that like it and enjoy it. Persimmons are also ones that could be grown. The American cultivar and variety is typically recommended for our planting zone of 5B. Know that this is a very tall tree and it can reach 30 to 35 feet in height. The Asian variety that you will sometimes see is good for zone 6 to 9. So for those in other planting zones other than zone 5, you may find greater types available to you. Meter is an American cultivar. It's recommended in Northern Illinois. Nikita's Gift, Yates, and others are mentioned too. In choosing the cultivars, you're going to find a wide range of new cultivars on the market. It's just, when you look and see from year to year, there's just so many new ones that are on the market. As much as University of Illinois Extension has websites and we have recommendations for cultivars, there's still a lot out there. I think it's very important at this stage for you to really know its growth features. You know, the dwarf, the semi-dwarf, the standard. This is going to ensure that your backyard orchard is the size you want it to be, and the yields and success are there for it too. Sometimes you will see heirloom varieties on the market, and they tend to have a little bit more imperfect fruit, potentially disease problems, and may be slightly finicky when it comes to their needs. Many of these older varieties are being grafted onto younger rootstock, and so it is addressing the disease problems, but you still maybe run into imperfect fruit and some finickiness to it. I always encourage you to know a tree's susceptibility. What are the disease problems going to be? We'll discuss disease later today, and I think this is very crucial to ensure that you have a very successful backyard orchard, is that disease is being controlled, potentially through the cultivar and rootstock selection. Some of these cultivars and tree types can be finicky. Peaches, plums, we tend to hope for the best, especially depending on the winter that we see. We just hope that everything's going to go as planned and they'll yield for us. I've heard from some growers anecdotally that Honeycrisp may take some time to actually get to some good yields, and this may be 6 to 8 years for it to get there. If we have periods of drought, if we have more rain than we really need in certain parts of our growing season, you may find that this delays ripening or causes that cultivar to be even more finicky than you were expecting. And as shared with you previously, if the minimum planting zone is 5, expect some troubleshooting here. This is a screenshot of one of the fruit tree catalogs out there, just kind of showing what this information looks like. You'll find lots of different ones out there. So some additional things to consider when thinking about cultivars. Start planning now. Typically, spacing on a standard tree is going to be about 20 to 25 feet. Semi-dwarf tree, 12 to 15 feet, and dwarf trees are about 6 to 8 feet. This is spacing down a row and between a row. And that should be something to kind of consider there. For my dwarf trees of the peaches that I planted this Sunday, I spaced at 10 feet. 6 to 8 feet, especially 6 feet from center of the tree to center of the next tree, you think it's a lot, and yet when you actually do the spacing, you realize can be pretty tight when it comes to it. As always, we encourage you to order from a reputable nursery or greenhouse company. Look to shop around right now. Lots of similar varieties and cultivars available. Know that many may be out of stock until a certain date. It may be that they're out for the year, or it may be that you may find these plants in the fall, perhaps. That's when they'll send it to you. Typically, we want to plan for a season-long harvest. So thinking of those yielding in the summer and then into fall. This depends, of course, on how big of a backyard orchard you would like to do. If you're just going to put out a couple of trees, then maybe you get an early season cultivar of an apple, and then maybe you have maybe a mid-season and then a late season cultivar, which we'll talk a bit more about today with it. But I think right now you're going to find that a number of these companies selling fruit trees and shrubs and other ones are being very overwhelmed with orders. So you may not get some of these trees for a couple of weeks. I've listed a number of different apple cultivars that are out there and available to you. This is very limiting, I recognize, because there's so many out there at this point. This includes things such as the summer eating and cooking, such as Red Free or Pristine. Early fall eating and cooking can be some of the ones that we commonly know about: the Gala, the Empire, the Ginger Gold. Pixie Crunch is a newer cultivar on the market from the last 5 to 6 years, I believe. It's a great fall eating apple. Very good tasting with it. Fall eating and cooking: Jonathan, Golden Delicious, Red Delicious. A lot of our staples of apples we're very familiar with, like Cortland, John Gold, and Crimson Crisp. These are just very common ones that will be yielding and becoming available in Northern Illinois, at least towards the end of September into the first couple weeks of October. A winter eating cooking apple, these would be a little bit late, probably when you're looking at the end of October into November, where these may be yielding for you and harvesting. This would be Braeburn, Fuji, Rome, Winesap, Enterprise, lots of different ones out there that are available to you. For pears, Maxine or Starking Delicious are two that have been recommended, as well as lots of other ones. Seckle, Hero Delight, Anjou, Duchess Stark, Moonglow, Maxine. Very wide range of them out there. As you look more into these cultivars and varieties, occasionally you will see some guidance telling you ones that will help pollinate one another or those that will not help pollinate each other. Sometimes you may have a variety of an apple or a pear that will receive pollen from another tree, but it will not give its pollen to that tree. And what that then means is that I now have to have 3 different fruit tree varieties instead of just having 2. They are selfish, if you will, when it comes to kind of withholding the pollen that they may have. They're taking pollen from another variety, but they're not giving their pollen back to help that variety produce fruit. I get a lot of questions about cider trees and hard cider trees. In most cases, in thinking of a backyard orchard with the idea that you're going to produce apples and manufacture it into cider, you usually are matching up different varieties that are sweet and tart and have other flavor compounds. There's a lot of guidance out there when it comes to actually the backyard orchard with the end goal of cider or hard cider. What we're running into right now is that there's some great cultivars out there, but there's a lot of demand for them. And it means that some of these are much harder to find and you're waiting for some time to actually get these cider apples. This may mean you're waiting 2 to 3 years, sometimes more, in order to actually purchase these cider apple trees because of all of this demand. I will say there is a company called Brick Cider. They're based out of Wisconsin. And while they do produce their own cider for consumption and for selling, they received a research grant from Wisconsin a couple of years ago to grow and try out different cider varieties of trees. So growing these different apple trees to see how they performed and tasted and give this information out. And you can find that information at their website under the website link that you see here. If you're thinking about cider trees, but you're just somewhat unsure about what ones you might want to grow. All right, one of the main areas that you need to consider in growing new fruit trees is to look for disease resistance. This is very common with apples and pears. We don't see it too often with peaches, plums, and other stone fruit. But especially in apples and pears, you want to look for cultivars that have disease resistance. And what this allows you to do is to control disease if you know what it is or it isn't a problem. It means that when you plant some of these cultivars in the backyard, if they have very strong resistance to disease issues, you may not have disease problem versus something being very susceptible to disease. For instance, you see this photo here provided by Purdue. If I am to grow Cortland, it is very susceptible to the apple scab disease, it's susceptible to fire blight, and it's susceptible to juniper rust or cedar apple rusts. It's also susceptible to powdery mildew. So knowing full well that that cultivar is prone to these major diseases, I might need to make sure that the rootstock that it's growing on provides some disease resistance. That's kind of the idea here with it. It also may allow you to reduce your spray schedule, or if you're a backyard grower that would like to not spray, you may find that addressing disease problems early on with it being resistant to disease can help with this. I still encourage folks to treat trees as if they may get to disease. You may, and while some may get some or have a little bit of susceptibility to it, still we'll talk about good cultural practices as we go along today that could help address disease. Most apple varieties will have some form of resistance, and you will find that it could be one or two diseases that they have resistance to, but still be a little cautious with some of those as well. The three that you see here, apple scab, fire blight, cedar apple rust, those tend to be the main three that we see issues with from a backyard orchard perspective, as well as on a large scale orchard perspective too. Powdery mildew can be a situation in some years too, but the three here, the scab, the fire blight, and the rust are the main ones that we see issues with. I will share with you photos of these today. One of the crucial steps that you will make as well when it comes to deciding on fruit in the backyard orchard is going to be the rootstock. And this is what's growing in the ground, basically. The roots, the stalk of the tree. It's a different cultivar below ground than really above ground. And what this is allowing for is to provide potentially disease resistance. It is allowing for that tree to stay that dwarf or semi-dwarf size. It is allowing for it to survive some of the winters that we run into. And the fruit quality are going to be the same above ground, no matter the rootstock. You see in this photo, this is a photo of my peach trees from this past Sunday. I am pointing to the graft union. So it means that below this union, it is the rootstock. And above this union, it is my actual peach cultivar and variety. It is very important that this graft union be planted above the soil line, at least 2 to 3 inches, or else the rootstock will take over. It's just a very common thing that can sometimes happen. But this is something that you will run into, and you will see as you purchase fruit trees and they're sent to you, you will see this kind of notch of a graft union. It's very predominant on that tree. Additional information about this rootstock. You may not be given much of a choice when it comes to what rootstock you want. Many of these companies and catalogs that are in the business of selling fruit trees are taking the information that you're giving them as far as your planting zone and as far as what cultivars are best for you. And from there, they are recommending a certain variety or cultivar. So they're taking this decision away from you. And in most cases, that's going to be fine. When I purchased both of my peach trees, I signified that I wanted 2 dwarf trees. And from there, that was then how the rootstock was determined for the trees I was going to grow. So I didn't have to worry too much about this. Yeah, as I shared with you previously, it is providing disease resistance. It is providing that winter hardiness, and it is in providing that height that we're expecting on the fruit trees that we're going to grow. If you did want to do some additional research on rootstock, some of the most common ones are M7, M9, which is a dwarf one, Bud 9, and M26. You also see occasionally rootstocks, the EMLA27, which is a good one for containers. And you see this reaches about 4 to 6 feet in height. You may run into a company where you have to decide on rootstocks. I feel like for most folks, especially from a backyard perspective, you don't run into this too much. I think the main takeaway I'd like you to know on rootstocks is that you will see that graft union of the rootstock, and you want to ensure that that is above the soil line when you're planting. Do you need more than one cultivar? It's a very common question that we get as we teach more in fruit production. There are just some fruit trees that need another variety in order to get their pollination requirements. And these are different cultivars blooming at the same time. What this means is that if I am going to grow 10 apple trees in the backyard, I should not be growing 10 Honeycrisp apple trees. I need to have more than one cultivar in there to ensure that they are getting their pollination needs met. In many cases, what you will see as you look to purchase more fruit trees is that these companies will recommend cultivars to you, or they may suggest that you get an additional one to help with pollination requirements or needs. Now, for apple trees, if you did have a crab apple tree nearby, or if you had neighbors who had crab apples and and apple trees, you may see and have potentially cross-pollination happen there and not need additional cultivars. But I would still recommend, if you were thinking of getting more apple trees and pear trees in the backyard, to make sure that you're getting more than one cultivar. That's a very common question and problem that we get through our Master Gardener hotlines, is someone calling with fruit trees for apples that have never produced for years. And the main issue is that they only were growing one cultivar and one variety. Peaches are self-fruitful and no other variety is needed. They're pollinated by the wind. You may find with stone fruit that they may recommend additional varieties and cultivars to just help with pollination. And I think that would be fine. But just know that you could get away with just one cultivar of that stone fruit. Apples, pears, and sweet cherries are self-unfruitful. So as much as I shared with you, stone fruit category of peaches tend to be self-fruitful, know that the sweet cherries category is self-unfruitful. So it's pollinated by pollinators, and you will need more than one cultivar for these three. What if you have run into poor pollination on your current trees? Perhaps you've had a couple of issues for the last couple of years where they are producing beautiful flowers and yet they're not producing fruit. It's possible you could have mismatched varieties, meaning that they may not be blooming at the same time, which is what you're after and what you need. You may also find that you might look to have pollinator strips and bring in plants and native plants that could provide some pollination habitats and pollinator habitats rather. You might be getting into kind of the bee business as well to provide this too. There could also be an environmental issue happening here, which we'll talk a little bit more today about. So this is a publication from Washington State University's Master Gardener training guide. And you will see these guides available to you through some simple searches. What this does is allows you to determine what the best matches can be for your varieties. So you see, if we start on the left side with our varieties that are listed. So let's look at Empire, for instance. As I go across the screen, and I will try to see if I can kind of do this with my annotate. Let's see if we can do this. All right. So you can kind of see with Empire, if I go across my screen here, it means then that any variety that's marked with an X would be an appropriate match. I could grow Macintosh and I could grow Empire, and they would cross-pollinate with one another. They would be blooming at the same time period. But I could not be growing Empire and Jonagold due to probably bloom period, but also there may be some other issues happening there as well. You also see if I'm growing Empire and Honeycrisp, they're not a good match, so they would not be able to provide each other with the pollen they need for it. As shared with you, these companies will be pretty upfront in providing this information and suggesting cultivars for you, but you may find to be prepared for deciding varieties that you want to do some additional research. All right, some other decisions to consider is that you usually have two types of fruit trees. You have what's called a whip or a Bareroot, and you have a feathered. Usually a whip and a Bareroot is more readily available. It's easier to find. It's usually a little less expensive. It may need some more training in pruning, and it tends to be delayed bearing by at least a year. What we find with the whip and the Bareroot, especially if you purchase these, is it's as if a twig came in the mail. You open the box of your fruit trees expecting something to be covered in leaves and just really, really pretty and have everything you need, and it's a twig. It certainly has roots, it's alive, but it just does not have that abundance of limbs to it just yet. A feathered yields 1 year earlier. Usually there's less training required because it has a lot of these branches already in place, and sometimes it can be harder to get. Usually these tend to be a bit more expensive, And sometimes you just don't have these available to you. The photo you see here is peach, one of my peach trees from this past Sunday. And so it was feathered. You can see lots of branches, you see buds. We are hopefully going to get a couple peaches this season. We hope, we'll see. Versus the other peach tree that arrived that did not look anything like this one. It was just that whip Bareroot. So already one of my peach trees is in a place where I can do some trellising and some training and some pruning versus the other one that I need to kind of wait for it to do its thing, if you will. But you may not be given much of a choice here. That's the simple truth of it. As you're going through these online websites, you know, your first step is deciding on your cultivars. The next step is thinking about, is it a dwarf, semi-dwarf, standard tree? And then that third decision is whether it's going to be a whip, Bareroot, or a feathered tree. And you may find that the one that you're after, looking for, say, a feathered semi-dwarf empire tree, is not available. You maybe just have one particular category. So if this is what you're encountering, I would lean heavier this year on making sure you have the right size tree and the right cultivar than I would on ensuring that it's a whip Bareroot versus a feathered, because you just may not be given much of a choice. So we've decided on our trees, and we're going to talk then now about planting. Let's think about some general soil needs. Because this is a perennial tree and we expect it to come back year after year, you want to do a couple of things and think about the location needs when it comes to planting these. Because our family had just moved into a new house and I was very unsure about what the backyard situation was, I called Julie. I called this utility consortium group, which I called them, I let them know that I was planning to dig and put trees in the backyard. And what that then happened was that signaled to the utility companies to come out and flag the backyard and let me know where the underground utility wires were. So I had representatives from ComEd, NICOR, as well as some others that came out. They put flags as to where the underground utility lines are, because I do not want to dig and plant my tree in an area and hit those power lines or those utility lines. This is a free service. I found pretty good success with it. You can Google Julie and find the contact information through them. The turnaround was very quick. I had it done in about 2 to 3 days. And as I shared with you, it was a free service. If you know where the utility lines are, you may be able to skip this step. But for myself and for my family, we needed to call and notify them. I also always recommend a soil test. Getting a soil test gives you a greater idea of what the backyard soil situation is and helps you to really figure out if you need to modify or change that soil up too much. As far as location, look towards full sunlight, look at having good weed control in place, making sure that if there is a major weed problem, that it is being addressed early on before actually planting your plants into that area. You may look towards kind of having good water and air drainage, so avoiding frost pockets where the ground just tends to kind of dip a little bit more. Look towards fertile soil, so you know it's really easy to get your hands into it. It's a nice kind of cookie crumb texture to it as well. Look also towards soil pH of 6 to 7, and this may be something that really is crucial when it comes to having good established fruit trees, is that soil pH is between 6 and 7. You can go a little bit higher up and be okay. However, it's very complicated to change a soil pH once you already have a plant that is growing and established. I find very good success anecdotally in having windbreaks for peaches, plums, and other stone fruit. Sometimes this means it's much closer to a house, so it can be provided some protection of a windbreak in this situation. Or you know, you're providing it from some other tree or other tree line within that area as well. You may consider having a water supply nearby. That may be something that you need as you look more into the summer and into the growing season. So let me walk through a couple of the photos from Sunday, kind of what I did. So the photo you see here on the left is the root system of that feathered peach tree, a very extensive root system. And the goal is to try to get as much of those roots in the soil as you can. You could clip off some of them that maybe shows some damage, but otherwise you want to try to get as much of those root systems into that hole as you can. It's also very important to make sure that these roots do not be balled up, if you will, when you plant them into that soil. You really want to have them be able to be spread out. One thing to also do before planting is to soak them in a bucket of water for at least an hour, and that can help kind of those roots kind of get a little bit ready to go, if you will. In the next photo you see, I'm digging the hole for this peach tree. And just as that feathered tree had such a significant root system, I did have to go down quite a bit of depth to actually put my soil and put my tree in there. You notice on the left of this photo of me digging, there was a lot of soil that was removed. And this is soil that's all going to go back into that hole. So we don't want to actually discard it or take it away. We want to actually keep it in shape. The other thing to notice in this photo is I brought with me some worm castings and some worm compost. I have mixed this up with that soil, so that would be a great addition to do at this time, is to mix up your soil that was removed with some worm castings or a compost that you might have some access to. So the depth of this hole for this particular tree was about 2.5 feet. It went a very far depth. Compare that to the other tree that was not feathered and did not have a significant root system. I did not have to go down as much with that tree. So you see on the left in this photo, yet again, we're trying to make sure that the root system can spread out, that it's given enough room. So you don't want that whole root system balled up itself. In this other photo here on the right, you see where that graft union is. So a very significant part of that tree that you can see. As far as how high up should you plant the tree, I really encourage you to make sure that the soil line is covering the root systems completely. So if you do have any of those stray roots higher up on that center part of the tree, you want to make sure that those are covered with the soil. And as you're bringing all this soil up, try to keep it pretty level as much as you can, and try to just make sure that you're not putting too much compaction necessarily. Following the planting of this tree, I then gave it about a gallon of water that I slowly watered, so it slowly trickled into the soil. And from there, my next step, the next couple of days, was to watch and make sure that the tree is staying where it needs to be. Sometimes the issue we run into is that the graft union will sink. So it will actually sink further into the soil. And we do not want it touching that soil line. So keeping it much more above ground is what you're after. I have a blog at the end today. I'll give you a blog resource that goes through this entire process of how I planted my fruit trees. Some other things to do on day one. Pruning is an option, and that will be coming up in the next couple of slides we'll talk about. You may want to look towards mammal control. Certainly having a weed-free area around the tree is what you're after. Anything where you may see some bark or something else, this could provide a habitat for mammals to damage the tree. So in this photo of my fruit tree, I do have some leftover peat moss that's around the tree, and I am going to remove this because it is providing protection for mammals to potentially move in and chew on this very young tree. The other thing to look towards is having some kind of deer guard or deer fence apparatus, and this would provide some protection from any type of damage that you may encounter with deer and other wildlife. If you are putting out a very large backyard orchard, know that fencing is possible. It can be expensive, and you tend to need an 8-foot tall fence in order to keep wildlife and deer populations out. Soap is another option to put around the neck of the tree that can be a bit of a deer guard, keep the deer away from it. You may have to change this soap out pretty regularly, but you will find that a very common one too. If it's a dwarf or semi-dwarf tree, it's going to need some sort of staking. As I purchased both of my fruit trees and they came in the mail, there was only one stake provided to me. So I'm in the process of finding another stake for my other tree. The staking can include bamboo, wood, metal, and many others that could be used to provide some kind of support for the tree. And as I share with you, a dwarf, semi-dwarf tree, you should expect staking for its entire life. That's just something that you will see. This should be provided very loose as far as tying the stake to the tree. And I would also encourage you to try to not have that stake right up close to your tree. You want to maybe have it about a foot away, potentially just less than a foot, to provide some support. The other peach tree that I currently have growing that does not have a stake yet is starting to lean towards one direction. So I already know I need to provide a stake to allow for support and also to keep that tree a little bit more center in its growing area. Pruning and training can also be done on day one. If it is a whipped tree, which you see in this photo on the left, in June and July, you may actually be able to do some very light pruning to kind of help with these established limbs. Because in most cases, a whipped tree is not going to have much limb growth as of right now. And this could be done with clothespins that could provide a little bit of weight to those limbs to allow them to be more lateral and not be growing straight up. You may be also able to provide some elastic around that tree to kind of bend those branches back just slightly. You'll see a lot of different recommendations out there when it comes to your fruit trees as far as training them and getting them kind of started. But yet again, if it's a whipped tree, this will not be something that you do until June or July of that first year. If it's a feathered tree, at planting, you could actually do a heading cut if you so chose. You see in this photo that the little red branches that are highlighted are ones that are being removed because they're broken or they're just a little bit misshapen. But you can find that a feathered tree at planting, that heading cut would be done just about 10 inches from where your last kind of branch is, which you see in that photo. You could further provide some string to pull down those branches if you needed, or provide some elastic with it. I find, especially from a backyard orchard perspective, you may not need to be doing as much pruning your first year, your first calendar year. I think it may be more crucial to actually get these limbs started, to get the tree on a very good path, and then approach pruning in, say, year 2, or even in a single year, towards the end of that next year, look at pruning with it for a year. But I think sometimes you will find that the tree may be in a good shape to start some of this, or it may not be. So I'll share with you some pruning. Yet again, we're very much past the point when it comes to actually doing pruning. I use this and share this with you just so you're aware of what some of these practices can look like. So we do want to prune. I think that's one thing where a lot of folks put out fruit trees and they walk away sometimes. They think that the trees are going to do great, and yet sometimes the problems that we run into are because the tree has not been pruned. And it's much easier to do it now, at least in the next couple of years, than to wait for 5, 6 years, if not longer. Typically, you're going to see apples and pears on a central leader. Think of this like a Christmas tree shape. An open center is more common for peach and stone fruit. And I tend to think of this a bit more of a open center vase kind of shape where your branches kind of open up more. And I'll show you a photo of what that looks like. In Northern Illinois, we prune from mid-December to March 1st. In Central and Southern Illinois, you may find that this is either too late or a little too early, perhaps. But certainly for what we see, mid-December to March 1st is when we recommend it. This is during dormancy when we are doing any type of pruning. There is a thought that you may want to do less pruning in mild winters for stone fruit. For instance, we have two peach trees at our Rockford office. They produced great for us in the previous year, but because of a very hard winter that we encountered in the winter of 2019, we did not get any fruit in the summer of 2019. And so what that then has meant is we're not pruning as much on our peach trees because we're hoping to have fruit this summer of 2020. So you may find that you want to do more pruning on stone fruit in those very hard winters compared to a mild winter, just to ensure that you are getting some of that stone fruit since it has to overwinter. And this is a photo of one of my apple trees in Tennessee. It needs some attention. So apples and pears, central leader, leader style. They have that kind of Christmas tree shape to them. We have one main trunk, and which is what you see here in the green in my drawing. Typically, it's about 5 to 8 feet tall. It's a dwarf, semi-dwarf one. The lowest branch is about 18 to 22 inches from the ground. 4 to 7 scaffold branches in blue, and these are the branches that will have little spurs in which you will get your actual apples and pears off of them. We see them about 4 to 8 inches apart vertically, 40 to 90 degree crotch angles on these as well. The crotch angles are in the circles that you see there, but the scaffold should not shade. So those blue branches should not be putting shade on any other branches on your tree. You see in yellow, those are some very common cuts that we see on trees, that kind of the first ones to go. A lot of times we're also making sure that any branches growing into the tree, like you see there in the purple, are pruned out as well with it. The suckers are in the red, and these suckers are kind of pencil width in size, and we see them very common all over the trees. It's kind of a response of the tree as you start to prune, that you get all these suckers and water sprouts and so forth. So a bit of guidance here just to kind of walk through. I take a lot of photos of my fruit trees, and then from there I actually will use the program of Microsoft Paint, and I will color my trees. So I will try to see where the leader may be. I'll look towards where my lateral branches and scaffolds are, where the actual fruit of the tree will be producing. I'll look and paint my vertical branches of what the vertical branches are and some of the ones that need to be pruned out. And it can give me a bit of a head start as far as what I know needs to come out and be pruned, and then what else needs to remain. And I find as I teach this course for those who have not pruned their trees in quite some time, taking lots of photos, using Microsoft Paint, coloring your trees, and getting a better grasp of what that tree shape could and should look like can put you on the right path towards good yields and having good success. The stone fruit, so yet again, kind of that kind of open bowl fruit shape to it. You see it's a very different design than what my apple and pear trees tend to be. So yet again, you have these scaffolds in the blue here, and you see them kind of right around kind of 2 to 5 branches kind of close together. And these are growing vertically. No branches are facing southwest because that will then lead to not getting enough sunlight. And this openness allows for that good airflow to then ensure that my peach trees and my other stone fruit are getting the right amount of pollination during this time. A lot of red that you see in this photo, these of course, yet again, are many branches that might be coming out of the tree. So I could be going through and pruning them out. Crotch angles are 40 to 90 degrees. And so these are how the scaffold blue branch is situated onto that central leader. This is a photo from University of New Hampshire Extension with their peach trees. Each yellow mark represents a cut that they have done. You'll start to notice then, as you think about that kind of open bulb shape, that you may have stone fruit that looks like this, or you may have stone fruit that you need to get to look into this shape, or you may have stone fruit that may never look like this. And I think that's okay. A lot of times as I teach pruning classes for fruit trees, we see such a wide range of different fruit tree shapes and sizes. And while we do tend to recommend, try to get these shapes that work best for the tree, we also recognize that sometimes it's going to take multiple years to get there. The reason that you're seeing such significant cuts on the yellow in this situation is we're trying to keep kind of more of that open shape with the limbs of those trees. Some other pointers to mention here, 30 to 40% cuts each year. I always tell folks to focus on the long-term health of the tree. We also don't recommend topping a tree. And a lot of times the main removal is dead wood, competing leaders, and suckers. You may also find in your backyard orchard that you have trees that are productive versus those that are tolerant. This could be that it is a 45-foot tall apple tree. It looks really rough, and yet it produces such great apples every single year. So to then do a lot of pruning may not make the most sense for that tree because it's just not at a state where it matters too much. You're still getting yields, it's growing great for you. You may find just want to back off some with it. Versus those dwarf, semi-dwarf trees, we're going to see the ability to really modify and change that tree. But recognize it's a collective 30 to 40% cuts each year. And it may take 3 to 4 years to get it back in shape. If it's a youngish tree, 3 to 4 years, maybe a little bit younger, you still want to follow those principles as far as the stone fruit or the apple pear, central leader versus that open center. You'll try to find a central leader branch, remove competing leaders, and focus a lot on sucker removal and prune to find replacement limbs. On this tree that you see here, it's really a lot of the red that is going to be removed. These are suckers. They're not doing me much good because they're growing vertically. You see them growing significantly on my blue scaffold branches here. So that would be what a lot of my cuts would be. The other thing that you'll notice is if you follow this green line, you'll see higher up in the tree, it's going 4 to 5 different directions. And so one of the main steps that I would do if I was pruning this tree would actually be to, think about which direction I want to go to this central leader. I might also even decide to just cut this entire piece off and make this new red branch my central leader instead. Maybe I do that just because of the direction and how that oddness of it is going. I'll share with you a resource at the end of the day of one of my previous webinars, and you can kind of walk through that process. But as I share with you, this is something that you would be doing during dormancy. A couple of other things to mention: clean between cuts, know that central leader, think about long-term focus, and you may have to remediate if damaged during the season. I think it's also important to recognize to not put any sealant on your trees. If you were to get damaged this season, if a big limb fell off of your tree and now you have an open wound on the tree, it's very important to not seal that wound up. You're just unfortunately going to have to just let it seal itself over or provide some kind of support. But the sealants that you commonly see can actually lock in moisture into that tree and cause some damage in the long term. We'll mention some seasonal issues here, some of the things that we see in Northern Illinois. Late spring cold snap, freeze. I know we're expecting snow this upcoming week. It will depend highly on the growth stages of the tree. You may find that the tree is just not at the growth stage where these cold weather would be significant as far as damaging or lessening the yields that you're expecting. I'll share with you a resource I found about this. Sometimes you have excessive fruit harvest one year and you have none the next. Potentially biennial fruiting is occurring. You need to prune better. You may also need to actually thin some of these branches or thin some of the fruits out. You may run into all fruits that fell from a tree. This can be an environmental seasonal issue. We do expect a natural fruit fall around July, but not all the fruits should actually fall. So you may have an environmental issue happening here. If it's not insect damage on your fruit, but the fruit, say, is small or misshapen, you may have a pollinator issue, and thinning maybe is needed here. It could be that you just don't have enough pollinators in order to get the fruit to really thrive. It may be that there's too many flowers even, and that could be one of the challenges that is running into it, is that it's just not moving enough pollination around. Due to our very cold winter of 2019, we had some significant questions come in about what are the impacts of this. I always share with you that each backyard is different. With apples and pears, we will most likely have fruit if we encountered that extremely cold, say -35, -36 Fahrenheit conditions in, say, January or February of next year. Apples, pears tend to get hurt more with a late spring frost or late spring snow. Peaches, plums, stone fruit, we did not expect to have any of these in the summer of 2019 due to the winter of 2019. Their cutoff is -8 degrees Fahrenheit for consecutive days. And this is negative degree air temperatures is what we saw. So peaches, plums, stone fruit, winter hits them very hard, and it's that -8 degree Fahrenheit that is the cutoff, versus apples and pears, where it's a later spring frost or snow that could damage them, and they should be fine to be able to tolerate a lot of those winter conditions. As always, there's not really less insect pressure, and we're not out of the woods yet. I think we're still looking to see how the next couple of weeks are going to be before we enter May. And this could be something that affects the apples and pears. I always hate to be negative, especially as we're getting very excited about these fruits that we'll be producing, but you just have to recognize that in the backyard orchard, especially in Northern Illinois. I'm going to go through a couple of different diseases and insects. This is in no way a thorough examination or a thorough overview of these. I always encourage folks to contact their local extension office if they believe they are dealing with some of these insects or diseases. And I also encourage folks to have them properly diagnosed before they think more about controlling them. This is more or less meant to share with you what you may have already seen and what you should be expecting on a yearly basis in some capacities. Apple scab is very common. You see it on the fruit here, the scab kind of coloration. We see it about every year, and sometimes it's just a question about how severe it could be. There are resistant varieties, and we do recommend growing those resistant varieties to really help when it comes to controlling this disease. Having good airflow and pruning for good airflow is crucial. You should also remove any fallen leaves, because that will be where the fungus tends to overwinter from the previous season with it, or rather the disease tends to overwinter. Fungicides can be effective, but they require multiple applications. The best strategy I recommend is removing the fallen leaves from the previous fall. So if you had apple leaves underneath the tree currently, try to rake them away and remove them right now this season, or else you may have it move straight into the tree. Yet again, some resistant varieties would be a great idea to consider. This is fire blight. We see it infrequently in Northern Illinois. Every couple of years, it will show up. And it is one where, yes, there are resistant varieties. And what you see here is actually a cherry tree that had fire blight damage. It is one where you need to do some pruning, and this could be done during dormancy, where you see kind of this cankered wood. Or you may find that you could do this during the growing season, about 6 to 12 inches. Of healthy tissue should be removed along with the cankered areas. Depending on when you see this and how you decide to address it, you will have to prune out part of that limb. It's just very crucial. I also still encourage folks to disinfect their pruners between any pruning methods. And this could be done with an antimicrobial type of solution. Folks have also dipped their pruners in Listerine and had some fine success with it, because we do not want to actually move this around with our pruners. It's recommended to avoid using high rates of nitrogen, and this is just because we don't want an abundance of all of this growth which then could spread more of the fire blight to the rest of the trees. Your third apple disease is cedar apple rust. This is noticeable on the leaves, which you see here of the trees. They need juniper or red cedar nearby in order for this disease to thrive. So you could, if you had a juniper or red cedar, you could remove some of these orange gelatinous galls, if you will. They look very almost like a sea anemone, if you will. And sometimes the trees are covered in these, and they are the ones that are kind of spreading it to these apple trees. It tends to be fairly cosmetic. It's on the leaves, and you see it sometimes on the fruit. There is a recommendation that you could remove cedars, and yet it is a 4 to 5 mile radius from your orchard. That's a lot of knocking on neighbors' doors, asking them to remove their cedar trees for the benefit of the backyard orchard. So it just doesn't make the most sense when it comes to it. No, it's fairly cosmetic. I'll mention some peach diseases, and you may see some carryover with some of the stone fruit. Brown rot is very common. This is in the upper corner, which you see here, this top photo. Disease begins at bloom. Long wet periods in the spring is how it can be spread, but it can also overwinter. And you may see those kind of mummified peaches that you couldn't get to the previous year that will actually have this disease on them as it overwinters into the next year. So those would be ones that you would want to remove, as well as during the season, collect and remove any of the fruit. Scab can also overwinter from previous seasons. It can be very common for the first year of growth. And you see a scab in this photo here, just kind of that very similar to the apple scab, but a different disease, a different pathogen. Control can include good pruning practices, providing very good airflow, considering some preventative fungicides that might be available to those trees as well. We'll get into some insects. Apple maggot, very common on our apples. It tends to kind of create kind of these pimple-ish, lichen blemishes on the fruit. It will emerge as a small fly in July and then lay its eggs within the fruit as it's developing. Some of the best management practices can be to actually pick up the fallen apples. If you had 1 or 2 dwarf apple trees, you might bag your apples in plastic. Depends on your situation. This might be something. One of the main recommendations is the traps, which you see in this bottom corner, this red sticky spear. It looks like a red delicious apple, and it has this sticky product on the outside of it that can be applied on a seasonal basis that can be hung around July 1st. You typically need 1 of these per 100 apple fruit that you expect on that tree. What this may mean is that you're putting multiple ones of these in your fruit trees instead of just 1 of these. But folks have very good success with this red sticky spear trapping. Also continue to pick up any fallen apples that have fallen. Codling moth, damage that you see here is the codling moth. It's very important to also pick up and remove any fallen apples or other fruits. Know that the adults can fly as far as 1 mile, so that's a bit of a challenge when it comes to them. There are insecticides available. There are traps, but know that this is not like the apple maggot trap. This is a trap that determines if the males are present, and then from there, you will have to do some spraying. So it's not going to trap the insects as the apple maggot trap actually will. But you see there's significant damage on the tree and on the fruit from the codling moth. Sanitation is key, and look towards potentially some insecticides. Plum curculio, this is apples, this is plum, this is cherry fruit. You see the adult one here in this top corner, what it looks like. And it is kind of leading to these kind of small crescent-shaped scars, which the larva will then move into. And you see it on the fruit as it's developing. There is a strategy where you could actually shape your tree limbs. And what happens is the plum curculio, the females, tend to fall onto a tarp underneath your tree that you've placed. And they tend to play dead, if you will. And you could collect the females and destroy them from there. You should also pick up and destroy early drops in May and June. And yet again, there may be some insecticides available for you as well. Cherry fruit fly turns flesh brown color. We see this one quite often when it comes to the cherries themselves. The females are piercing that yellow cherry skin as it's developing. They're laying eggs into it, and of course the maggots are coming out of them. You could monitor with yellow sticky card near the bloom time. You could also remove any infested fruit to keep from overwintering. That could be a cultural practice that you do. You may find that there are some insecticides available for this one as well. A clear sign would be this brown infestation, this brown discoloration on the fruit. Those are just a couple of diseases and some of the insects that we've run into with the backyard orchard. I just use that as just to get you introduced to them with it. One of the things to look at and think about would be if you want to actually have a spray schedule in place. And this could include those organic pesticides as well as those conventional ones. And they may be necessary depending on what your fruit expectations are. These spray schedules should follow from dormant pruning into summer based on tree development. So it's not necessarily based on what the calendar date is. It's based on the growth of your actual fruit trees and what you're seeing with them when it comes to how to spray and when you could spray. We still recommend to spray early evening when there's less pollinator activity, even if your trees have already flowered, they're already starting to produce the actual fruit. If you're not going to spray, I encourage you to use good practices. I think that's what I really see a lot of folks have a great experience with when it comes to a backyard orchard and controlling insects, diseases, wildlife, and others. So with a spray schedule, if you decided to spray or not spray, what are some other strategies that you could do? Certainly plant and replace with disease-resistant cultivars. That can help address many of the disease problems that we see with apples and pears. While we don't see it as much with cherry, peach, and other stone fruit, the disease-resistant cultivars for apples and pears would be very crucial. Look towards utilizing traps and lures for insect control, especially with apple maggot and potentially with codling moth to tell you if that insect was there. Look towards having guards in place to keep the trees from having mammal damage, or having some of those repellents hanging from around the neck of our fruit trees. Having good pruning practices can allow for better airflow, which in turn could reduce disease severity and allow for your limbs to dry out and so forth. You might also even look towards providing trellis support for the trees, which could help the tree also sustain more and better airflow. Look to thin out any fruit that might be excessive on your tree. This could be done via hand or through some of those other thinning agents. And clean up leaves debris during and end of season away from the tree. Any of those gross looking apples can be a carrier and provide a habitat for these insects to be a problem. That can be one of the main things that you can really do to help with this. As you look at spray schedules, they will have different growth stages. So I've provided you kind of an overview of what this looks like, and we'll have a resource at the end of today with this information too. But in essence, a spray schedule will say that, okay, at dormant spraying to address this insect or this disease, this would be the fungicide or pesticide that you could be applying. When you're at bloom period, where 25% of the blossoms on your tree are open, this would be an insect or disease that you need to worry about, and then this would be that pesticide or fungicide that you need to apply and utilize with it. So it can walk through the whole basis of addressing insects and disease along with those good cultural practices. Well, hopefully we've survived. We have had a fine season without any disease or insect pressure. You've got great fruit that has now been produced. And now the question is, when should I pick it? When can I eat it? For peaches, it tends to not have any green color. You should have a bit of a firmness, but not too much. It should be almost like a softball in its feel. Cherries, it's going to be a taste test. Know whether it's sweet, whether it's tart. That can help quite a bit with it. For apples and pears, these tend to be picked during a certain month, a week-by-week basis. You may find the color and the taste is also a good signifier for when, especially apples, these are ready to be harvested, to be picked, and ready to be used. Pears should snap cleanly off the branch when at a 90-degree angle. Spots become brown, and you will also find a bit of a waxy feel to it. Compare that to Asian pears. Asian pears, the skin color will change. It's green to yellowish green, and it will actually ripen on the tree. So it's going to be very different from how a pear will ripen. One of the things that I will look at when it comes to determining when I'm going to harvest my apples is that I will look towards the other commercial orchards in my area. Every season, I tend to notice that the commercial orchards will have a schedule of harvest date in when they expect things, different cultivars to be available to be purchased at their operation. And they'll put this on their social media, through their Facebook and other avenues. And this allows me to have an idea that, okay, I'm growing John and Mac in my backyard orchard. And when should John and Mac be available to me? Well, around September 7th is what this orchard, maybe 5 miles from me, is planning to pick theirs. This could be a strategy to help you determine that. So depending on where you're located, you may be near a number of commercial orchards, and you may look towards their harvest schedule to help you out. That yes, you could go to their orchard and buy Pink Lady that year. However, if you're going Pink Lady in the backyard, we might expect that to be harvested at the end of October. So this is a strategy that I will use when it comes to determining when certain cultivars of apples can be harvested. So a bit of the seasonal management, yes, try to prune in the winter with a long-term focus, train those branches for better structure, putting some weights on those scaffold branches that you have on your tree. Spring and summer, this is right for insect pest control. You might look to apply an aged manure or a compost. Try to also keep that area as weed-free as possible. Fruit trees are not trees that should really have a mulch layer around them, because that will just lead towards more wildlife issues. In the summer, utilize those traps, clean up any bad fruit that you see that has dropped underneath the trees, as this can be where insects thrive and disease thrives. And in the fall, rake, remove leaves as far away as possible. There's not always good guidance when it comes to how far these leaves should be removed, but I would say try to make sure that they're in an area where the wind cannot pick up any fungal spores and bring them back to those trees. The guidance just isn't there as well as it should be. So I'm beginning to wrap up. Please go ahead and add some questions to the chat box, and we'll get them answered at the end today. I will send you an email with some of these resources, but I want to highlight a couple of them. If you want more information on pruning, especially some of those older and neglected apple trees, I have recorded a YouTube presentation from 2 to 3 years ago, and it's available on the University of Illinois Local Foods YouTube channel. You can find that presentation there. University of Minnesota Extension has some wonderful home orchard guides. Those will also be in the email that I send you as a follow-up. They go into both stone fruit as well as apple and pear production. University of Illinois Extension still maintains a website called Growing Apples and More. It is a little bit dated, so just kind of keep that in mind, that some of the information isn't necessarily where it needs to be in 2020, but you may find some good information within there. Cornell has a document called Growing Fruit at Home that I like and I share with a lot of folks I work with. And University of Missouri also has home fruit production on apples. Pawpaw information can be found through Kentucky State University. A wealth of information is found on their website with lots of different cultivars, varieties, and some of the challenges that they're running into when it comes to growing pawpaws. Just to highlight a couple of upcoming things happening in our extension system, our blogs are still very active. We have the Good Growing blog with Chris Inroth, Kim Johnson, and Katie Parker that is walking through the vegetable season. So you will see some really good information there. Callie Alsop with Flowers, Fruits, and Frass just did a document, Easy Seeding at Home with Limited Materials. She provides really good resources there. And then I maintain a blog, Raise, Grow, Harvest, Eat, Repeat. And Monday, I just put a blog post called How to Plant a Fruit Tree, which goes through some of those logistics that I mentioned. We also still have webinars occurring. Growing Horticulture in Northwest Illinois by Bruce Black is on Wednesdays from April 1st through May 13th from 10:30 to 11:30 a.m. And the Beginning Gardener webinar series is hosted by a number of educators in Southern Illinois. This is on Tuesday and Thursdays from April 7th to April 23rd, and it is from 6 to 7. As always, these webinars are free currently, and so you may find some really good topics that have crossover with what we talked about today. So there is my contact information. Please note I have a new phone number and you can reach me now. You can find me at that phone number as well as my email address. We have a very active Facebook page along with our unit Facebook page with lots of different extension activity occurring as well. You will get an email from me today that will include a link to an evaluation, a very short survey and evaluation. I would appreciate you filling that out. You could also, with your camera phone, as I understand it, take a photo of this graphic here underneath questions, and that will take you to the survey too. So I am going to now answer some questions then in the chat box. All right, the first question is, we have some volunteer peach trees that have been growing a couple of years. Can we expect to see any fruits on these? I think it's going to depend. I think you may get some fruit off of them, but if it is, say, a peach tree where the fruit came from a previous peach that fell on the ground, you may find it's not the same variety. You may find it just has something a little bit different with it. So you may not find much truth to this when it comes to a volunteer peach tree that comes back. I still think every backyard's a bit of an experiment. So maybe try it out, give it a couple years to see how it does for you. But you also may not have any. It's hard to tell sometimes. The second question is size-wise. How much bigger is a semi-dwarf tree than a dwarf tree? In most cases, the height is the main difference. So it's going to be about 10 to 12 feet let me step back, about 12 to 15 feet height in a semi-dwarf tree compared to a dwarf tree that really we expect a height of 8 to 10 feet. As far as branch length, they may look very similar. So you may not have much significant difference there. Question, can you prune suckers now or only December to March 1st? I still want you to do sucker removal during dormancy. I think if you did have the urge, you could do a little bit of sucker removal, those very small pencil width growths that are vertically growing up on the tree. But I really don't want you to encourage too much of that with it. If you get the urge though, maybe a little bit in the next week or two, but certainly do not do anything later on in the season. Question, I'm seeing local interest in haskell, honeyberry plants. They're typically zone 2 to 4, but say they can be grown with care to zone 8. Any thoughts you could share on them? So we have haskell and honeyberry plants growing in the back of our Rockford office. This is zone 5A, 5B, if you will. It's a great bush. It performs really well. The fruit is very flavorful. The spacing is very similar to blueberries plants. I have not pruned them in the last couple of years because I have felt I haven't needed to. But when you look at some of the other trendy berries out there, those tend to be ones that perform pretty well. So you may have some success with them. I just don't know how the summer weather, if you're in zone 8, is going to do for them. But as far as zone 5, we do see some success with those. On the chart of compatible apple cultivars, John Gold and another had none that were compatible. Why is that? what would be compatible? I think what I saw on that chart is it's possible that it could be blooming at an incorrect time. I think that may be what the issue is with Jonna Gold and those cultivars. I know when you search Jonna Gold, say through Stark Brothers or say Jung Seeds, you will see a number of cultivars listed. My suspicion of that chart is that Jonna Gold is blooming at an incorrect time than those others. There could also be something else going on that I'm just not sure about with the Jonna Gold. In most cases, those charts should have some kind of cultivar that should provide the pollination. And yet I don't know why that one, especially on Jonna Gold, doesn't have that. My suspicion is bloom time. Question, can you explain why pruning post-dormant is inappropriate? When you prune post-dormancy, especially if you prune a significant amount, the tree is already beginning to go into that next growth stage, and it's trying to send energy to those areas. So it's trying to send it to the blossoms to bloom for you in the next period. Versus if you then prune, the energy starts to then go back to where you just pruned. And so it's now going to focus greater energy on the cut that was made on that tree. So it can just kind of throw the tree off because it's wanting to actually do in the next stage, and yet you've pruned and now it has to focus its energy other place here as well. Another issue is that if you were to prune, say, in August and September, which we do not recommend, that's actually more damaging to the tree because it doesn't have enough time to seal up some of those wounds that have occurred once you have pruned. And it could actually damage that tree further when that next freezing frost comes in. So the dormancy is when we recommend it just because there's enough time for the tree to get to the next stage of growth and for any significant cuts to be cleaned up and to sealed up, if you will.